The cold October ground of Oakwood Cemetery offered little comfort, its vast expanse of towering oak trees bearing silent witness to countless farewells. 70 years of life, 43 of them devoted to the woman now lying 6 feet beneath, had etched deep lines of wisdom and weariness onto Sergeant First Class Roland Kemper's face. His weathered hands, usually steady as a seasoned soldier's, trembled ever so slightly as he stood motionless beside his wife Margaret and Kemper's freshly turned grave. The morning mist clung to the headstones like reluctant ghosts, mirroring the profound grief that refused to leave him. He wore his only good suit, the same navy blue fabric that had draped his frame 28 years ago when he received his Bronze Star. It hung looser now on his shrinking form, a poignant testament to time's passage, yet his military bearing remained intact. Shoulders back, chin up, eyes forward, an unyielding dignity in his sorrow. A small American flag pin, barely visible on his lapel, was a silent, meaningful emblem to those who understood the sacrifices it represented. Rose petals, scattered from the funeral service, lay scattered around Margaret's simple headstone, a delicate contrast to the raw ache in his heart. For over an hour he had been there, whispering to her, sharing memories only they understood, a final, sacred conversation in the quiet communion of grief. Roland, who had enlisted in the Army straight out of high school in 1972, serving 2 tours and earning his Bronze Star for carrying 3 wounded men to safety during an ambush, never abandoning a fallen comrade, found himself in a cruel echo of his past. After 30 years building the very community he'd sworn to protect, and 43 years married to Margaret, his anchor, his strength through nightmares and civilian life, his battle buddy through her 3-year fight with cancer, he felt as though half his soul had been torn away when she passed. Standing at her grave wasn't just grief. It was his way of reporting for duty one last time. In the military you never left a fallen comrade. Margaret wasn't a soldier, but she'd been his battle buddy through life's toughest fights. He simply would not walk away and leave her alone in this cold ground. It was then that Officer Danny Morrison, a young man on the force for only 8 months, eager to prove himself, stepped forward. Dispatch had reported a possible vagrant loitering in the cemetery, and Morrison, assuming he was dealing with a homeless person who'd climbed the fence after gates closed at sunset, responded with an authority that far exceeded his experience. The old man didn't fit the typical transient profile Morrison had encountered, but rules were rules. When Roland, his voice heavy with fresh grief, tried to explain he was simply visiting his wife's grave and had lost track of time while saying his final goodbyes, Morrison heard only excuses. The young officer grew impatient. He had been trained to assert control, to not let civilians dictate terms. When Roland humbly asked for just 5 more minutes to finish his prayers, Morrison saw defiance, not desperation. This profound misunderstanding, this cruel lack of empathy in a sacred space, marked the chilling beginning of Roland's ordeal. As Roland, overwhelmed by a grief that made his very bones ache, gently sat down on a nearby bench, seeking just a moment to gather his fragmented strength, Officer Morrison saw not a man consumed by sorrow, but a challenge. He interpreted Roland's weary movement as active resistance, a blatant defiance of his authority. He barked into his radio, fabricating a claim of an uncooperative individual refusing lawful orders. Within minutes, the chilling wail of sirens pierced the cemetery's somber peace, and 2 more patrol cars materialized, their flashing lights casting an eerie, pulsating glow over the sacred ground. The situation, already strained, spiraled wildly out of control. Backup officers, their faces grim and unyielding, surrounded the elderly veteran, demanding he stand and place his hands behind his back. Roland's ingrained military training, a lifetime of automatic obedience, kicked in. He began to comply, but his body, ravaged by arthritis and the crushing weight of emotional exhaustion, moved slowly. Morrison, mistaking this slow compliance for continued defiance, made the fateful decision that would shatter Roland's world. As the cold metal cuffs clicked around his wrists, Roland felt something break deep inside his chest. This wasn't how a man should be treated at his wife's graveside, not in the America he had fought to defend. The biting cold of the handcuffs against his skin dredged up a terrifying memory. Another time, another place, when he'd been captured during a mission and held for 3 agonizing days before rescue. The officers pushed him roughly toward their patrol car, and Roland caught sight of Margaret's headstone one last time. Her name a silent accusation in the fading light. He remembered her last words to him in the hospital, a whisper of unwavering faith that he was the strongest man she'd ever known, that he'd always done the right thing, even when it was hard. Standing there in handcuffs like a common criminal, felt like he was failing her memory, failing everything they'd built together. His mind, in a desperate, fleeting escape from the cruel present, drifted to their wedding day, Margaret's radiant beauty in her simple white dress, their joy palpable even in their poverty. He saw her squeezing his hand through each contraction as their children were born, trusting him to be her unyielding strength. He remembered teaching their son to throw a baseball, walking their daughter down the aisle at her own wedding, each memory a precious, aching wound. The young officer was shouting something about resisting arrest, but Roland barely heard him. All he could think about was how Margaret would utterly despise seeing him treated this way. She had always been so fiercely proud of his service, so proud of the man he'd become. Now, he was being arrested like a common criminal at the very place where her body lay, waiting for him to join her someday. Morrison radioed for a taser when Roland stumbled slightly while being led to the patrol car. The elderly veteran's legs, unsteady with grief and age, simply weren't as strong as they once were, but Morrison saw the stumble as an attempt to resist or escape. The situation spiraled beyond all reason as backup officers joined in, physically restraining a man who posed absolutely no threat to anyone. Roland tried to explain once more, his words coming out broken, interrupted by the raw grief that kept catching in his throat, about the funeral, about his wife, about just wanting to say goodbye properly. But the officers, blinded by protocol and a shocking lack of empathy, interpreted his emotional state as intoxication or mental instability, rather than the natural, profound response of a man who had just buried his life partner. The injustice was a suffocating weight, pressing down on Roland's weary soul. A small crowd began to gather at the cemetery gates, drawn by the flashing lights and the escalating commotion. Word spread quickly through the quiet neighborhood. An old man is being arrested at his wife's grave. Mrs. Chen, from the corner market, a woman who knew Roland from his daily visits to buy Margaret's favorite flowers, recognized him instantly. Her heart ached at the sight of his humiliation. Without a second thought, she began making frantic phone calls to friends and family, her voice trembling as she described the horrifying scene unfolding before her eyes. Among those calls was one to Tommy Rodriguez, a young Marine who lived just 3 blocks away. Tommy had met Roland at the Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall, where the old soldier sometimes shared quiet stories with younger veterans, bridging generations with shared experiences of service. Tommy knew Roland's history, knew about Margaret's long, valiant battle with cancer, and knew, with a heavy heart, that today had been her funeral. A fierce, protective instinct ignited within him. He grabbed his dress blues from the closet, his fingers flying as he made his own urgent phone calls. Within minutes, he had reached 6 other Marines from his unit who lived in the area. The message was simple, stark, and undeniably powerful. A brother was in trouble, and brothers don't abandon each other. They began converging on Oakwood Cemetery, their military training already kicking in, assessing the situation even as they sped towards it. The officers, growing visibly frustrated by the crowd's mounting attention, became more agitated. Morrison, convinced Roland was becoming increasingly uncooperative and that his authority was being challenged in front of witnesses, made a final, rash decision. He reached for his taser. Roland wasn't fighting back. He was just bewildered and heartbroken, his body heavy with grief. But it didn't matter. The electric current from the taser surged, violently dropping Roland to his knees beside the patrol car. His body convulsed, 70 years of life experiences flashing through his mind in a dizzying, painful blur. The sound that escaped his throat wasn't quite a scream. It was the raw, primal cry of a man who had given everything, to his country, to his family, now being treated as if he were nothing. That agonizing sound, a profound testament to shattered dignity, carried across the cemetery, cutting through the autumn air, and reached the ears of 7 Marines in dress blue uniforms who had just arrived at the gates. Tommy Rodriguez felt something ignite in his chest, a righteous fury, as he watched the elderly veteran writhing on the ground while officers stood over him. This wasn't law enforcement. This was cruelty disguised as authority. The Marines moved with a precision that comes from shared training and an unbreakable bond forged by shared values. They didn't run or shout or cause a scene. They simply walked through the cemetery gates in formation, their polished shoes clicking against the pavement in perfect, synchronized rhythm. Their uniforms were immaculate, their bearing unmistakably military, their purpose clear to anyone who understood the profound brotherhood of service. Morrison looked up from where Roland lay gasping on the ground, and saw the 7 Marines approaching in an unwavering line. Something in their eyes, a quiet intensity, an unyielding resolve, made him take an involuntary step back from the elderly veteran. These weren't protesters or curious bystanders. These were active-duty Marines who had recognized one of their own being gravely mistreated, and their silent arrival spoke volumes. Tommy Rodriguez, the senior enlisted man among them, approached Morrison with a quiet, unwavering confidence that came not from borrowed power but from true authority. He moved with the precision of a Marine, his gaze steady as he asked to see Roland's identification. The reveal of Roland's military service record, a testament to decades of unwavering duty, hung heavy in the air. Then Tommy's voice, calm but laced with an undeniable steel, pierced the tension. He asked Morrison to explain exactly what crime had been committed that required tasering a 70-year-old veteran at his wife's graveside. The backup officers, their earlier bravado dissolving, began to realize the gravity of their monumental mistake. The crowd at the gates had swollen, now including other veterans who had heard what was happening, their faces etched with shared outrage and solidarity. Cell phone cameras, once a mere nuisance, were now relentless witnesses, recording every damning detail. Morrison's supervisor was en route, along with the cemetery director, who had been called about the disturbance. The net was tightening. Tommy knelt beside Roland, his movements gentle and protective, helping the old soldier sit up and checking for injuries from the taser. Roland's body, still trembling, slowly found a semblance of strength in Tommy's presence. The other Marines, silent and formidable, formed a protective perimeter around Roland, their posture not threatening the officers but making it unequivocally clear that Roland was now under their protection. The dynamic had shifted completely, irrevocably. Authority now belonged not to the badges and the tasers, but to those who understood the true, profound meaning of service and sacrifice. Within 20 minutes, Morrison's supervisor arrived on scene, his face a mask of controlled panic, immediately initiating damage control. The cemetery director, arriving shortly after, confirmed that Roland had legitimate, written permission to be on the grounds following his wife's funeral service that morning. The fabricated trespassing charge evaporated like mist, taking with it Morrison's credibility as an officer. Roland was helped to his feet by Tommy and 2 other Marines. His dignity, so cruelly stripped away, now restored by brothers who understood profoundly what it meant to serve. The cold, impersonal handcuffs that had shackled his wrists were finally removed, replaced by gentle, supportive hands that guided him back to Margaret's grave, where he could, at last, complete his farewell in peace. The Marines stood at respectful attention, unmoving, while Roland, his voice stronger now, his military bearing subtly returning, spoke his final, whispered words to his beloved wife. Morrison, his career effectively over before it had truly begun, faced an immediate internal investigation for excessive force and failure to properly assess the situation. His body camera footage would be reviewed, witness statements taken, and his actions scrutinized by superiors who understood the public relations nightmare of tasering a veteran at his wife's funeral. The other officers involved faced lesser, but still significant, consequences for their role in escalating a situation that should never have happened. Department policy was swiftly reviewed and changed to require supervisory approval before arresting anyone over the age of 65 for minor infractions, a direct consequence of this painful injustice. Roland spent another hour at Margaret's grave, this time protected by Marines who understood that some things are sacred, some moments inviolable. He thanked each of them personally, his voice thick with gratitude, his gaze meeting theirs with a quiet, deep respect. These young warriors, his new brothers, had reminded him that the brotherhood of service never truly ends, that no veteran stands alone when push comes to shove. The story of Roland Kemper, tossed at his wife's graveside and then cradled by the unwavering loyalty of his Marine brothers, didn't stay confined to the solemn gates of Oakwood Cemetery. It exploded, rippling through social media and local news, quickly becoming a poignant symbol of both what can go horribly wrong when authority lacks wisdom and what so beautifully goes right when people of honor stand up for what's correct. Roland, the quiet veteran, received hundreds of letters from fellow veterans and civilians alike, each one a testament to their profound respect for his decades of service and their collective outrage at his treatment. These messages, filled with empathy and gratitude, were a balm to his wounded spirit. 3 weeks later, Roland returned to Margaret's grave, his gait steadier, a quiet determination in his eyes. In his hands, he carried 7 letters of heartfelt thanks, each one carefully addressed to the Marines who had stood with him that day. He had written every word by hand, just as Margaret had taught him was proper for matters of deep importance. In each letter, he poured out his soul, trying to explain the immeasurable meaning their presence had held for an old soldier who had, in his grief, truly believed his days of brothers in arms were behind him. He understood now, with a clarity that brought tears to his eyes, that Margaret's final gift to him hadn't been her last words or her peaceful passing. Her true gift had been showing him, in that raw, desperate moment, that honor still exists profoundly in the world, that there are still people, young warriors in dress blues, willing to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard, even when it means challenging authority. The Marines hadn't merely protected him from an injustice. They had reminded him that the very values he had served for, loyalty, dignity, and unwavering support, were still vibrant, still worth defending. Every veteran, Roland now believed with unwavering conviction, deserves to be treated with the inherent dignity their service has earned. Every person, regardless of circumstance, deserves compassion in their moments of deepest grief. And every community, every corner of this nation, needs people brave enough to stand up when those fundamental principles are threatened, whether they wear uniforms or not. That, he reflected, was the America worth fighting for, the America worth coming home to. The memory of the taser, the cold handcuffs, faded into the background, replaced by the warmth of brotherhood and the enduring power of respect. Roland Kemper, the grieving veteran, had become a quiet, living testament to the truth that some bonds transcend rank or age, and that true honor, like a flickering flame in the mist, can ignite a beacon of hope and remind us all of the profound, unbreakable promises we owe to one another.